I've been out in the sun the last few days, so there you go. There you go. Look at that. I'm half Italian. Not actually. But, yeah. I'm here to talk to you today about the crisis of the 3rd century. It's the second video in a 3-part series that I'm going to make about just crises that affected Rome, and then one on Byzantium, which is the plague of Justinian. But this one is on the crisis of the 3rd century. Now, just before I say anything about this, I'm just going to tell you that I am going to be skipping over mega detail here. Like, this is by no means a blow-by-blow account of every day of the crisis of the 3rd century. It is like the major events that went on, so if I miss out your favourite part, then oh well, didn't put it in my notes, but put it in the comments because it's probably important. If I've missed any key details out, just do the same, just put it in the comments. Tell me and I will make an update. So, what was the crisis of the 3rd century? It was a crisis that occurred in the 3rd century, the 3rd century AD, and it ended up, for a time, splitting the Roman Empire into 3. It trisected it into the Gallic Empire, the Roman Empire, which just stayed the same, and the Palmyrene Empire. And during that time, we fell into absolute chaos, to the point where the scribes had actually stopped writing. At least they were not writing in anywhere near the volumes that they had been, because we know a lot less about this period than we do about like the periods before and after, and then obviously way after that goes into the Dark Ages and we have even less. But during this time, like Aurelian, very famous emperor, don't know much about what he did. We know major events, but in detail we don't really know much about what he did to the same degrees we do with previous emperors. Right, how did it begin? Well, it began with Commodus being executed, and then they had the Year of the 4 Emperors, and at the end of that, Septimius Severus was the emperor, the first emperor of the Severan dynasty, or dynasty, whatever way you want to say it. Sorry about the cups behind there. I'll make sure they're gone for the next video. But he was the first emperor of the Severan dynasty, and he noticed that there was a problem with the soldiers' pay, that they needed basically placated because they were complaining about the rate of their pay. So he doubled it from 300 denarii to 500 denarii. I couldn't find like what time span that has been paid across, but he almost doubled it. He just about doubled it. And at the same time, they were just coming out of the Antonine Plague, which the previous video was about. I'll link that in the description of this video. And their manpower was low, their defences were low, they were coming out of the Marcomannic Wars as well, so there were still periodic Germanic raids on the Germanian territories, the German territories, and the Gallic territories. So he had to, at the same time as he was increasing the pay of the army, he also had to increase the size of the army. So he was recruiting loads of new people and paying them way more than he had. So how quickly do you think, how long do you think this would take before it started to have an impact? The answer is not very long, because he realised that he was going to run out of money to pay them. So what he did was he debased the currency by adding copper to it and removing some of the silver from it. So this didn't have an immediate economic effect because it wasn't that bad, but it definitely set a precedent which later emperors would follow, and that precedent definitely caused major problems later on in the century. Septimius Severus was 193 AD. He was the end of the Year of the 4 Emperors, and the seeds were being sown then for future crisis. This was basically done, as I said, to placate the army. They were unhappy with their pay, and it it made them more loyal. But at the same time, since he was paying them more and the army was bigger and they were taking more from the treasury, so it increased the emperor's reliance on the army for support, and in doing so decreased the actual power that the emperor had over the empire. Now, that is a step along the road to basically martial law, where the emperor has to have the loyalty of the army, and that was always true to an extent in Rome. But sorry, I died a bit there. It's probably true to an extent in every state which has a government, that the leader, the emperor, the king, the prime minister, the dictator needs the support of the army and the people and his bureaucrats in his office. Like, if he doesn't have at least one of those, he's out in his ear. But what Septimius Severus did, or Severus, what he did, he definitely increased the reliance of the emperor on this, and in doing so decreased the power of the emperor over the empire. And you can definitely see this later on when you get to the barracks emperors, of which there were 20 in just a 50-year period. You can see that definitely when they would basically just raise someone up from the ranks, like raise their general up to be in the purple, basically. And that was happening left, right and centre. People were getting assassinated, but more on that later in this video. After a long 20-year span of the Severan dynasty, the people were unhappy, the military were unhappy, quite a lot of people were unhappy, especially with the last emperor of the Severan dynasty called Alexander Severus, or Severus. And he came to the throne quite young, and he had a huge reliance on his mum. This was considered to be weakness, and she was considered to be the scheming woman, the archetype, like the kind of sexist archetype of the horrible woman in the background, like spinning all the men to her will. So they ended up assassinating him after there were German raids still going on, and this was 235, and his mother, on the advice of his mother, he paid off the Germans to stop rather than fighting back and destroying them. And I think what the main problem was, apart from the fact that basically a woman was in control, I think what the problem was that they were thinking, well, if you pay them off, they're going to come back and expect payment again, but if you destroy them, then that's a disincentive to come back rather than an incentive to come back. Because why would they stop coming back to where they get paid? Ducks know that people are there to feed them, so why would they stop coming when people come near the edge of the water, basically? And he was assassinated, and it was Maximinius Thrax, a general from Thrace, who was elevated to be emperor by his army. And he was the first barracks emperor, which just means an emperor that was raised up by the army. And there were 20 of those over a 50-year period, so I'm not going to list them all in this video. But it's basically a very unstable way of gaining power, because you rely on whether the army like you or not. So if you do anything wrong, you're gone like that. So you need to be very careful basically with how you run things if you've been raised by the army. As a result of these emperors being raised by the army, as I said, that was a very kind of unstable way of gaining power. So they did end up with a lot of ineffectual leaders who had just been raised so the army could basically use them as puppets. So quite a lot of them were assassinated by the army, because even though they were raised to be their puppets, they didn't know how to puppeteer. So there were many short reigns. I think the average reign was 4 years, something like that, 3 or 4 years anyway. And these short reigns led to instability, and in combination with the currency debasement that Septimius Severus had set the precedent for, this caused big economic problems. There were much the same way as the previous video about the Antonine Plague. You can see the decline in business, you can see the decline in art, and the scribes went writing, so it's like, it's just not good all round, basically. And this caused the argument, like, this allowed the argument to be made that a partition of the Roman Empire was in order. So, people got away with splitting it into the Gallic Empire, the Gallic Empire, which covered modern-day France, Belgium, and Britain. The Palmyrene Empire, which was Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, parts of Anatolia, down through the Levant and the Holy Land into Arabia and Egypt as well. So they had the breadbasket of the Roman Empire and the Palmyrene Empire. So immediately huge problems there. And the Roman Empire, which was everything else, it was Iberia, which is Spain and Portugal. It was the rest of the African provinces. It was Italy and down through Illyria and Greece, basically the Balkans. And yeah, those were the three segments that were now the Roman Empire. You had Postumus in the west, you had Zenobia in the east, and you had basically many emperors in the centre. So these were perceived at the time, as I said, to be reasonable partitions, not rebellions. Although looking back on it, these people were definitely just vying for power. They were obvious opportunistic power grabs in my view. They may have helped, but it doesn't change the fact that wars were fought by Aurelian to bring them back into the fold of the Roman Empire. So like, can't have been that helpful, or can't have been that well intentioned, I'll say. So what did he do? Aurelian, he was the last of the Barracks emperors, and he made it his priority. He made it his thing to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory by bringing back in the Palmyrene Empire and the Gallic Empire. He'd proved himself to be a skilled general in campaigns against the Vandals and the Goths, so he was raised and he set about it. He fought Zenobia. She raised her armies to fight him in the east, and I believe her general was called Zabdas or Zabdas. I don't know how to say his name, but he used the Mongol tactic of a feint attack. So he ordered a cavalry charge at her line, at the Palmyrene line, and then feigned a rout and ran back to a battlefield of his time and his choosing, and then basically just annihilated the Palmyrene army. So that was the Battle of Imi, or Imi, or Ime, or Imai. I don't know how to say that. I only see these words written down, so any corrections you have for the pronunciations in the comments, please. But I'll say Imi, or I'll say Imi actually, I'll say Imi because canny. But yeah, the Battle of Imi, Aurelian won that one, and won back the eastern provinces into the fold of the Roman Empire. And even though he annihilated the army, Zenobia and Zabdas, her general, got away. Not sure what happened to them. So he won the east back and begun to march on the west after his triumph. So he then was campaigning against the Gallic Empire and won a decisive victory in 274 AD at Chalons or Chalons or Calons. I don't know how to say that either. Comments please. These were the strong Roman armies of old. These were not the weakened crisis of the 3rd century Marcomannic anemic armies that had been in force over the last maybe 80 years or so. These were Augustus level armies. These were Caesar level armies and Pompey armies. These were all the old Roman heroes. These were great. So he'd restored the Roman Empire to its former glory. But the crisis was not over, because there were still civil wars brewing. There were still various problems that had been started by Septimius Severus. There were still economic problems. There were still it was basically a martial dictatorship because the emperors were getting raised by the armies. Aurelian was then murdered in Thrace on his way to campaign against the Sassanid Persians, and that was it. Diocletian then rose up. Diocletian is the next major character in our story of the crisis of the 3rd century. He elevated the office of emperor to divine status. He started associating it with Jupiter himself, and he started to roll back the reforms that had happened over the last 80 years or so that had caused the crisis in the first place. He at least made an attempt to stop debasing the currency, although I'm not sure if he understood inflation, but he made an attempt to fix the currency. He elevated the office of emperor to divine status, so challenging it was then heresy, and in the zealous ancient world, this was terrible to basically be heretical towards the emperor or anything like that. So that was a good move if you want to extend the lifeblood of the Roman Empire. And he also lowered the army, the emperor's reliance on the army, because what had been happening up until that point was the Roman army had been a massive standing army, basically, with garrisons on the forts at the border walls and stuff. So what he did was he basically stationed bigger permanent garrisons, and then said that the standing army would reinforce the garrisons rather than having an omnipresent massive army that was basically going to end up like a band of marauders. So that decreased the reliance of the emperor on the army and allowed him to exercise his power a bit more rather than being frightened of the soldiers all the time. The final thing he did, and probably the most famous thing that Diocletian did, was he concluded that the empire was too big to be governed by one man in a centralised fashion. So what he did was he partitioned it into the Western Roman Empire that would be ruled by an Augustus and a Caesar, and the Eastern Roman Empire, who would be ruled by an Augustus and a Caesar. So he created the Tetrarchy, which was a phrase that I knew before learning about any Roman history, really, so it's famous enough. He also set up dioceses, Diocletian diocese, and each was each was kind of, that would be the template that the church would go forward with, giving that segment of land to a bishop. That's where the term came from. He basically partitioned it up even further and gave kind of individual people control over smaller areas to decentralise it a bit, because once again he just felt it was too big for one guy to do. And I actually probably agree with him. Like, that's 50 million people in a time where the population of the whole world was like 200 million. So that's a quarter of the population of the world that you're governing. So one guy probably can't do that to any good degree without crises emerging every now and then. But that was the crisis of the 3rd century. So I think it's insane that the Roman Empire survived that crisis for another 200 years even. I think it's only with the work of Aurelian and further after him, Diocletian, that the empire would even be able to survive. It's mental. It definitely weakened the empire economically, and in terms of manpower, the population of Rome just dropped off a cliff, especially after this part. It had started in the 190s AD, but after the crisis, the 3rd century, man, just dropped off a cliff to almost nothing, from about 1.5 million to about 40,000 in about 100 years. Mental. It led to the partition which continued the Eastern Roman Empire into the Byzantine Age, and that ultimately lasted until 1453, when Mehmed the Conqueror sacked it and sieged it, and then sacked it and made it the Ottoman capital. So definitely set in motion a process that would continue the Roman Empire's ideals on for a millennia, which is insane in and of itself, really. If you're wondering what happened to Diocletian, he retired to Illyria, which is present-day Croatia, in the northern Balkans, and farmed potatoes and cabbages in his mansion. So, what a weird guy, basically. Restores the Roman Empire, then goes to farm cabbages in Croatia. Strange man, but that was after him abdicating the throne in 303 AD. He lived there until 311 BC, where he died an old guy. So, a heartwarming tale. If you leave out the persecution of the Christians, you'll just not talk about that. So, not all his reforms continued, like the Tetrarchy that only lasted a couple of generations until Constantine the Great. But there you go. Another chapter in the endlessly interesting saga of Roman history. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd be very interested to see if I've gotten anything wrong. So, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, give it a share, give me a subscription, and I'll see you in the next video.